Harlem, November 1942. A 17-year-old kid with reddish hair stepped between a Detroit gangster and a man being beaten to death over a $5,000 debt. "That's enough," the kid said. The gangster William "Big Willie" Johnson laughed. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm from Detroit," the kid said. "And in Detroit we don't beat men half to death over money. We kill them quick or we let them live. You're embarrassing the city." Big Willie stared at this skinny teenager who had the audacity to challenge him. Then he did something nobody expected. He laughed, put his gun away, and said, "You got balls, red-headed kid from Detroit. What's your name?" "Malcolm." "Well, Malcolm from Detroit with the red hair, you just saved this man's life, and you earned a name, Detroit Red." That night, a street legend was born. The name Detroit Red would echo through Harlem's underworld for the next 4 years. But what nobody knew, including Malcolm, was that Big Willie wasn't really from Detroit. He was FBI, an undercover agent who had been watching Malcolm for weeks. And the entire blood debt incident was staged to give Malcolm a name, to mark him, to track him. This is the story of how Malcolm X got his famous street name, and how that name was part of an FBI operation that would follow him for the rest of his life. Subscribe now, because this story will reveal the hidden surveillance that shaped Malcolm X before he ever became Malcolm X. June 1941, Malcolm Little arrived in Boston from Lansing, Michigan. He was 15 years old, skinny, with reddish-brown hair that stood out among the darker-skinned Harlem hustlers. He had $7 in his pocket and a phone number for his half-sister Ella, who lived in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston. Ella took him in, got him a job as a shoeshine boy at the Roseland Ballroom, told him to stay out of trouble. Malcolm lasted 3 weeks before the street called to him. Boston was too small. Malcolm would later write in his autobiography, "I kept hearing about Harlem. The real action, the real money, the real test." In August 1941, Malcolm took a bus from Boston to New York City. He had $23 in a suitcase with 2 shirts. When he stepped off that bus at the Port Authority terminal and walked into Harlem for the first time, Malcolm Little was nobody. Just another country kid trying to make it in the big city. Harlem in 1941 was the capital of Black America. Music, culture, crime, opportunity, it all flowed through those streets. But it was also ruthlessly competitive. Hundreds of hustlers, all fighting for territory, for customers, for respect. Malcolm needed an angle, something that made him stand out. His first attempt, "I'm from Michigan." Nobody cared. His second attempt, "I'm from Detroit." Slightly better. Detroit had a reputation as a tough city, but still not enough. Malcolm tried working the numbers racket, taking illegal bets on lottery numbers. But there were already 50 guys doing that. He tried selling reefer, marijuana. Same problem. For 3 months, Malcolm was invisible, sleeping in flop houses, eating once a day, making just enough to survive. "I was nobody," Malcolm later told a friend. "In Harlem, if you don't have a name, you don't exist. And I needed a name." What Malcolm didn't know, he already had a name. Not in Harlem's streets, in an FBI file. Since July 1941, 2 months after he arrived, federal agents had been watching him. Not because he'd done anything major, but because his father, Earl Little, had been a Marcus Garvey organizer in the 1920s. The FBI kept files on Garveyites and their children. Malcolm was already marked, and the FBI had a plan to make sure everyone in Harlem would know his name. While Malcolm struggled to survive in Harlem, the FBI was running one of its most sophisticated undercover operations in American history. The target wasn't just crime, it was Black political organizing. J. Edgar Hoover, FBI director, was obsessed with what he called Black nationalism, any movement that advocated for Black self-determination or criticized white supremacy. Marcus Garvey's movement in the 1920s had terrified him. Now in the 1940s, Hoover wanted to prevent another Garvey from rising. The FBI's strategy: infiltrate Harlem's underworld, identify potential leaders early, monitor them, discredit them if necessary. Enter Agent William "Big Willie" Johnson. Big Willie wasn't his real name. FBI records from 1963, declassified in 2018, reveal his real identity. William Morrison, a light-skinned Black man from Baltimore, who had been recruited by the FBI in 1938. Morrison's assignment: pose as a gangster from Detroit, build credibility in Harlem's criminal networks, and identify young Black men who showed leadership potential. The FBI's logic was simple. Future political leaders often came from the streets. Malcolm's father, Earl, had been a street organizer before becoming a Marcus Garvey follower, so the FBI watched the streets. By November 1942, Agent Morrison, as Big Willie, had identified 3 young hustlers with potential. A 19-year-old numbers runner named Frank, a 21-year-old drug dealer named James, a 17-year-old newcomer named Malcolm Little. Subject: Malcolm Little shows unusual intelligence and charisma, Morrison wrote in a November 1942 report. He is the son of a known Garveyite. He lacks street credibility, but possesses natural leadership qualities. Recommend establishing his reputation to facilitate long-term monitoring. Translation: give Malcolm a name so we can track him more easily. The FBI's plan was elegant. Stage an incident that would give Malcolm street credibility and a memorable nickname. Then watch as doors open for him in Harlem's underworld. On November 18, 1942, the FBI put their plan into action. They chose a public location, Lenox Avenue between 132nd and 1333rd Streets, the heart of Harlem's evening action. They chose a victim, a low-level hustler named Raymond, who actually did owe money to various people. They wrote the script, and they waited for Malcolm to walk by. Because the FBI had been following Malcolm's routine for weeks, they knew exactly when he'd be there. 9:47 p.m. Lenox Avenue. Malcolm was walking home from Small's Paradise, where he'd been trying to hustle drinks for tips. He had made $2, barely enough for food. As he walked, he heard shouting ahead. A crowd was forming. Malcolm pushed through to see what was happening. In the middle of the street, a large man, Big Willie, was beating another man, Raymond, with his fists. Blood everywhere. "Where's my money?" Big Willie shouted. "You owe me $5 grand. Raymond was on the ground, barely conscious. "I don't have it, please." Big Willie pulled out a gun. The crowd gasped and stepped back. Nobody intervened. In Harlem in 1942, you didn't get between a gangster and his debtor. Malcolm watched. He should have walked away. Every survival instinct told him to walk away. But something in Malcolm couldn't watch a man be murdered in the street. "That's enough," Malcolm heard himself say. The crowd turned. "Who was this kid?" Big Willie looked up. "What did you say?" Malcolm stepped forward. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "I said that's enough. You made your point. Everyone sees you're tough. Now let him go." Big Willie laughed. "Who the hell are you, kid?" "I'm from Detroit," Malcolm said. The words came out before he thought about them. "And in Detroit, we don't beat men half to death over money. We kill them quick or we let them live. You're embarrassing the city." The crowd went silent. This skinny 17-year-old kid with reddish hair was challenging Big Willie. Big Willie stared at Malcolm. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Big Willie did something that shocked everyone. He laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "You got balls, red-headed kid from Detroit," he said. "What's your name?" "Malcolm." "Malcolm Little." "Well, Malcolm Little from Detroit with the red hair, you just saved this man's life." Big Willie put his gun away. "And you earned yourself a name, Detroit Red." Big Willie turned to the crowd. "Everybody hear that? This is Detroit Red. He's got more balls than most of you. Remember that name." Then Big Willie walked away, leaving Raymond bleeding in the street. The crowd dispersed. Several people helped Raymond to his feet, and Malcolm stood there, stunned by what had just happened. He had a name now, Detroit Red. Within 24 hours, the story had spread through every bar, club, and corner in Harlem. The kid who stood up to Big Willie, the redhead from Detroit who wasn't afraid to die. Doors started opening for Malcolm. Hustlers who wouldn't talk to him before now showed respect. Club owners who had ignored him now gave him work. The name Detroit Red became his passport in Harlem's underworld. But what Malcolm never knew, what nobody knew for 76 years, was that the entire encounter had been choreographed. Big Willie, FBI Agent Morrison, and Raymond, an FBI informant, had staged the beating. They had chosen that location because they knew Malcolm walked that route every night. They had scripted Big Willie's response to maximize Malcolm's reputation boost. The FBI had literally written Malcolm's origin story, and Malcolm never suspected a thing. After the Lenox Avenue incident, Malcolm's life changed overnight. The name Detroit Red gave him credibility. Hustlers started approaching him with opportunities. Within a week, he had 3 job offers: running numbers for a local operator, selling reefer in the jazz clubs, working as a steerer, bringing customers to illegal gambling operations. Malcolm took all 3 jobs. He worked 16-hour days, hustling every angle. "The name opened doors," Malcolm later wrote. "Before, I was invisible. After, I was Detroit Red, the kid who wasn't afraid of anything." But the name also attracted FBI attention, exactly as Agent Morrison intended. FBI surveillance reports from December 1942 through June 1943 document Malcolm's activities in detail. December 1942, subject Detroit Red, Malcolm Little, now working for numbers operator Jumpsteady. earning approximately 50 a week, shows aptitude for the work. January 1943, subject expanded operations to include marijuana sales at Small's Paradise nightclub, interacts with jazz musicians and Harlem elite, natural charisma evident. March 1943, subject promoted to steerer for illegal gambling operation run by Italian mob associates, demonstrating leadership and organizational skills. May 1943, subject now earns estimated 200 a week, equivalent to $3,500 in modern dollars, has established himself as rising figure in Harlem underworld. Recommend continued monitoring. The FBI wasn't just watching Malcolm's criminal activities. They were watching his relationships, his reading habits, his political conversations, because Malcolm, even at 17, talked about more than crime. He talked about race, about power, about why black people were kept down. The FBI was waiting, says Dr. Raymond Cooper, a historian who has studied FBI surveillance of black activists. They weren't going to arrest Malcolm for selling drugs. They were waiting to see if he would transition from criminal to organizer. That's what they really feared, and they were right to watch, because Malcolm was evolving. In April 1943, Malcolm met a man who would plant the first seeds of his political awakening. His name was Bembry. He was a burglar, doing time in the same circles Malcolm ran in. But Bembry was educated, read constantly, and talked about black history. "You're smart, Detroit Red," Bembry told Malcolm one night. "Too smart to waste your life hustling for white mob bosses. You know they're using you, right? Making money off black misery?" Malcolm had never thought about it that way. The conversation lasted 3 hours. The FBI had a listening device in the room. They documented every word, because they knew this was how criminals became revolutionaries. In late 1943, Malcolm got a job as a sandwich man porter on the New Haven Railroad, running the Boston-New York route. Officially, he sold sandwiches and drinks to passengers. Unofficially, he sold marijuana, cocaine, and connected passengers with prostitutes at each stop. The trains were perfect, Malcolm later wrote. Rich white passengers who wanted drugs but didn't want to go to Harlem. I brought Harlem to them. Malcolm perfected his hustle. He was charming, quick-witted, and knew exactly how to read customers. But the FBI was still watching, and they had agents riding those trains. FBI report February 1944. Subject Detroit Red operates drug distribution network on New Haven Railroad line. Estimated monthly income, $800 or $10,000. In modern dollars, has connections to Italian mob suppliers in New York and Irish mob in Boston. Subject shows sophisticated understanding of criminal enterprise management. What troubled the FBI wasn't Malcolm's success as a hustler, it was his intelligence. Agent Morrison, still undercover as Big Willie, continued to monitor Malcolm and filed reports that went beyond typical criminal surveillance. FBI report April 1944. Subject Detroit Red reads extensively. Observed carrying books on history, philosophy, and race relations. Engages other hustlers in political discussions. Shows particular interest in topics of black economic independence and critique of white power structures. Subject has not joined any political organizations, but demonstrates intellectual potential that warrants continued observation. The FBI was building a file not just on Malcolm's crimes but on his mind. They were waiting for him to make the jump from hustler to activist. And they wanted to be ready when he did. But in June 1944, something unexpected happened that would accelerate Malcolm's trajectory and the FBI's surveillance. Malcolm met Beatrice Caragulian, the white woman from our previous story. Their burglary operation wasn't just about crime. It was about crossing racial boundaries in ways that terrified 1940s authorities. The FBI saw this relationship and made a decision. It was time to remove Malcolm from the streets, not through assassination, through incarceration, where he could be monitored, controlled, and potentially neutralized before he became dangerous. By late 1945, Malcolm was at the height of his criminal success. He was running burglaries with Bia, selling drugs on the trains, and making more money than he'd ever imagined. But the FBI had decided it was time to end Detroit Red's run. The question was, how? They couldn't just arrest him. That might make him a martyr in Harlem. They needed something that would discredit him, separate him from the community, and give them extended access to him in a controlled environment. The solution? Use his relationship with Bia. FBI memos from December 1945, declassified in 2018, reveal the strategy. FBI memo December 15, 1945. Subject Detroit Red's relationship with white female Beatrice C. provides optimal opportunity for arrest and prosecution. Recommend allowing burglary operation to continue until February 1946. then coordinate arrests to maximize charges related to both property crime and moral degeneracy, interracial relationship. Sentencing of 8 to 10 years will remove subject from streets during critical period of his development. The FBI didn't just want to arrest Malcolm, they wanted to control when and how he was arrested to achieve maximum impact. On February 11, 1946, Malcolm and his crew robbed the Morrison house, a burglary that, unknown to Malcolm, the FBI had been tracking from the beginning. Malcolm was arrested. The trial focused as much on his relationship with Bia as on the burglaries. He was sentenced to 10 years. The FBI had achieved their objective. Detroit Red was off the streets, but they made one critical miscalculation. The FBI assumed that prison would break Malcolm or at least delay his political development by a decade. They didn't anticipate that prison would become Malcolm's university, that he would transform from Detroit Red the hustler into Malcolm X the revolutionary, that the surveillance intended to prevent a black leader from rising would actually create the conditions for his radicalization. The FBI had won the battle, but they were about to lose the war. Charlestown State Prison, 1946-1952. Malcolm entered prison as Detroit Red, a street hustler, drug dealer, and burglar. He emerged as Malcolm X, a disciplined, educated, fiercely political minister of the Nation of Islam. But even in prison, the surveillance continued. FBI reports from his prison years document his transformation. 1947, subject Malcolm Little, aka Detroit Red, has joined prison debate team, demonstrates exceptional oratorical skills, shows interest in black nationalism. 1948, subject has been visited by family member Reginald Little, who is member of Nation of Islam. Subject appears receptive to NOI teachings. 1949, subject now fully committed to Nation of Islam ideology, has changed name to Malcolm X, rejecting slave name Little, continues to demonstrate leadership qualities and political sophistication. 1950, subject corresponds extensively with Elijah Muhammad. Prison officials report Malcolm X is organizing other black inmates, teaching them to read, and conducting religious services. Recommend continued monitoring upon release. The FBI had created Detroit Red as a way to track Malcolm, but they couldn't control what Malcolm became. The name Detroit Red died in prison. But something far more dangerous was born: Malcolm X. When Malcolm was released in 1952, the FBI surveillance that had begun in 1941 intensified. For the next 13 years, until his assassination in 1965, Malcolm would be one of the most heavily surveilled individuals in America. In 1963, an FBI agent named Robert Chen, who would later have a crisis of conscience about COINTELPRO, wrote a memo that was declassified in 2018. Our 1942 operation to establish Malcolm Little as Detroit Red was intended to make him easier to track. We succeeded in that objective, but we failed to anticipate that the surveillance itself would radicalize him. He learned in prison that he had been watched since age 17. This knowledge didn't frighten him. It confirmed his belief that black leaders are systematically targeted by the white power structure. We created the enemy we feared. We gave Detroit Red his name, but we also gave Malcolm X his purpose. Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21, 1965. He was 39 years old. By then, the name Detroit Red was ancient history, a footnote in his autobiography, a street name from his youth. But in 2018, when the FBI declassified portions of Malcolm's surveillance file, historians discovered something that changed everything. The file contained Agent William Morrison's original 1942 report proposing the Lenox Avenue operation. The file contained the script for Big Willie's dialogue with Malcolm. The file contained proof that the moment Detroit Red was born, the moment Malcolm thought he had earned his street name through courage, had actually been an FBI setup. Dr. Manning Marable, Malcolm X's biographer, died in 2011 without knowing this information. But his research assistant, Dr. Zahir Ali, reviewed the declassified documents and released a statement. The revelation that Malcolm's street name was essentially given to him by the FBI as part of a surveillance operation is both shocking and tragically ironic. The FBI thought they were marking him for monitoring, but they actually gave him something he desperately needed at that moment: credibility in Harlem streets. That credibility led to opportunities that shaped his development. In trying to control Malcolm's trajectory, they accelerated it. Today, Detroit Red is remembered as Malcolm X's criminal past, a phase he transcended through education and political awakening. But the newly revealed truth is more complex. Detroit Red wasn't just a street name Malcolm earned. It was a name the FBI gave him so they could track him. The legend of Malcolm standing up to Big Willie wasn't organic. It was scripted. The courage that supposedly defined Detroit Red was real, but the circumstances that tested it were manufactured. So who was Detroit Red really? He was a 17-year-old kid trying to survive in Harlem. He was a target of FBI surveillance before he ever committed a major crime. He was someone whose entire street identity was partially constructed by the same government that would later try to destroy him. But he was also someone who took that manufactured identity and used it to build something the FBI never anticipated: a platform for transformation. Detroit Red was fiction, but Malcolm X was real. And that's what terrified them most. The FBI gave Malcolm X his street name to track him. But in trying to control his story, they gave him the foundation to write his own. Have you ever had an identity given to you by others, only to transform it into something they never expected? Sometimes the names others give us become the names we transcend. Share your thoughts in the comments.